Let's go to the NFL now. The Cowboys, they decided to franchise tag George Pickens after he led the team in receiving yards and touchdowns last year. However, Pickens was looking for more money, more time, as in a long-term deal. They still have time to get that done. So where do things stand? Well, here's Jerry Jones yesterday.
There's no issue with me with talking to agents. I need to do a better job of not getting, well, Daddy said I could have it, and him going to Mama and Mama saying, Daddy said I could have it. We've got to get on the same page, and I have something to do with that as well. It always works out. If he worked without an agent, he'd save a lot of money.
Do you anticipate going into...
With me.
So if he worked without an agent, he could save a lot of money with me. I'm not really sure what to make of that, but nonetheless, what's your reaction to Jerry Jones' comments in terms of George Pickens, Stephen A.?
I'm very disturbed by what Jerry Jones said. I'm going to call him. I'm going to go see him if I can, you know, if he will allow me to, because I'm not comfortable with what words I just heard come out of Jerry Jones' mouth. Look at the reporters behind him. Look at their faces when you brought up Daddy coming to, well, yo, man, come on now. I mean, that's a very, very uncomfortable thing. I love me some Jerry Jones. Everybody knows that. Everybody knows that's my guy. I don't like that. I don't like that at all. That's incredibly uncomfortable to say. And I know what he meant in terms of a player talking to him and coming to him and saying, I want X, Y, and Z, and then going back to his agent, and then all of a sudden, you know what, it's a different ballgame. That's what he said about Micah Parsons. He had a conversation with Micah Parsons, and Micah Parsons said one thing to him, and then after going to his agent, David Mulugeta, he comes back with a different spin on it all, and Jerry Jones was really turned off about it. And to use his words, I don't play that bleep. That's what he said when he came on my radio show. Here's the issue. Daddy, Mommy, Jerry Jones, watch your mouth. Come on, man, you better than that. Watch it. Because that comes across as very, very wrong. And when you're talking about black players, you know how that's going to be perceived. That comes across as very, very wrong, highly insensitive. You don't need to be using that verbiage. That's number one. Number two, listen. At some point in time, Jerry has to pay attention to the fact that David Mulugeta is considered one of the best agents in the business. Mm-hmm. Let's get that out the way right now. This is not a slouch. This is not some novice. This is not some dude that just came along and he's a hanger-on that a player trusts, and you're ill-equipped to negotiate a deal. David Mulugeta is recognized as one of the best agents in the world. He's that big time. And to talk about and to use daddy, mommy analogies and all of that stuff, and it comes across wrong, Jerry. It comes across wrong. And it's highly insensitive. And I'm going to say that. Listen, everybody knows my relationship with Jerry Jones. You know how I feel about him. Hell, I received an award from Nancy Lieberman's foundation. And Jerry Jones was the surprise presenter to me, doggy. Jerry Jones and I are pretty tight. I got a lot of love for that man. I know what he's done for countless black players. I know what he's done, okay? And I know that I know he's a good man. But my point is, you can't say stuff like that. You can't come across like that because it's bad. You in your 80s, you from the South, you using verbiage like that. You know how folks are going to take it. And just because you're the billionaire owner of the Dallas Cowboys don't mean that you can't receive some heat for the stuff that comes out of your mouth. You can't talk like that. You cannot do that. Having said all of that, you still, at the end of the day, if you're not going to negotiate with David Mulugeta, it also prompts another question. If you don't have a problem with agents, why does it appear as if David Mulugeta is the only agent that you're really, really not that interested in talking to? I haven't heard of any other players who've had a problem with their representation having a conversation with the owner of the Dallas Cowboys. If I'm wrong there, I apologize, but I haven't heard about it. We've heard about it with Micah Parsons. Now we're hearing about it with George Pickens. Two dudes represented by the same guy. Jerry Jones has some explaining to do in that regard. But when I talk to him, especially when I see him, that's a conversation that we're going to have, because I don't like the way he didn't have to do that. He could have came up with 1,000 different ways to make his point rather than doing it the way that he did it. It's very, very condescending, very insulting. And I'm telling you right now, black folks listening to that ain't going to take kindly to verbiage that Jerry Jones used. It's just a fact.
Fair. I'm on the bigger Jerry Jones. You know, I try to go one ear and out the other with him anyway, but Steve did an excellent job there with the verbiage. I would not sign Pickens to a long-term contract. That's me. They have CeeDee Lamb. You don't need two receivers making $40 million a year. You don't need Pickens got traded from Pittsburgh. We saw that Detroit game last year where things weren't going great, and Pickens was sort of in and out of the game, not mentally sharp, a game they had to win. I am not a huge Pickens fan. Now, he's great when he's focused, raring to go, but I don't think the Cowboys need two receivers making that kind of money. So if it was me, I would go a different direction. Sounds like they want to work out a long-term deal. They franchise tag him, so he's going to make $28 million. That's a one-year deal. If it was my team, I'm not paying a second receiver that kind of money. I'm not doing it.
The other part that we have to bring up a couple of things. Number one, the consideration. First of all, let's understand that George Pickens deserves his money, Doggy, based on his performance. Now, you are right that they probably don't need to have two receivers. You know, like you got Jamar Chase and T. Higgins making about $69 million, annually. And in the case of CeeDee Lamb and George Pickens, it would be in the same ballpark in the event that he got that long-term deal. I understand your aversion to that, Doggy. I'm not necessarily saying I disagree. But let's not talk as if George Pickens doesn't deserve the money. It's really because you already have one in receiver CeeDee Lamb making big time dollars like $36 million that you don't want to do that. It's not because of George Pickens' level of production. It's because you already have an all-star or all-world receiver, and you don't want to spend that much money when you can utilize and allocate those assets elsewhere. So let's get that out the way. But the important point to bring up also is this. Dak Prescott is on the record saying he wants George Pickens re-signed. You know that's something they have to consider because Dak Prescott is making $60 million a year as the quarterback. He's the franchise quarterback. He's the star of the team. And you want to be in a situation where you maximize his level of productivity and justify the investment you made in him. So you're giving him the requisite weapons necessary in order for you to be the high-powered offense that you paid your quarterback to be. But in the end, what it comes down to is this. You're Jerry Jones. All right, you've made some moves since Micah Parsons has been gone. They haven't been bad moves. You could utilize that money elsewhere to get an inordinate amount of assets to buffer Dallas's defense and to be considerably better collectively than they were last season. I get that part, but you still don't need to be talking like that. You really, really don't. And by the way, you know what? You decided that you wanted to franchise tag George Pickens. That was a mistake because in the end, if a cat is looking for a long-term deal, you franchise tagging him keeps you in the headlines for sure, but it's a distraction. And that distraction has religiously and historically come back to plague the Dallas Cowboys. It doesn't work for them on the football field. It has been proven. So if you're not going to sign him to a long-term deal, just move him. Don't wait until the last minute. Don't be starving for headlines to the point where you become a distraction to your team and its ultimate productivity. If you're going to move the man, move him because he ain't coming on the field unless you give him a long-term deal. And I don't blame him. In the sport of football, you're George Pickens with all that money on the table, with Jackson Smith and Jigba and what he just signed for, $120 million guaranteed, $40 million a year. You, George Pickens, you cannot step on that field for a one-year, $27.3 franchise tag deal. You can't do it. You got to hold out and go someplace else that's going to give you a long-term deal.
But that's what's frustrating about the Cowboys. Like, you had an opportunity to get in front of this. Had you just paid him prior to franchise tagging him, then you wouldn't even be in this situation. And then Jackson Smith and Jigba, albeit playing in the Super Bowl, is a little bit of a different story, goes and gets this big deal, and now you've set yourself back to give him more money. This happens year after year with the Cowboys. I don't understand it. He was also the most targeted receiver last year. So you're going to go 1 year having your anchor of your defense leaving at the last minute to maybe having the one player that was targeted the most on your offense possibly leaving again.
Remember one thing about Parsons now. We spent hours on it. Goes to Green Bay, gets hurt, team collapses. Terry says, you can't pay linebackers $45 million a year. You can't do it because it's too much money for your cap to pay a linebacker. You got to pay a quarterback, don't pay a linebacker. Mm-hmm. And they paid, and as it turns out, the Cowboys made the right move with Parsons. They got players, and he played 10 games. If you are the Cowboys, you're going to bring Pickens. You got Lamb making a fortune. You're going to bring Pickens back here, another wide receiver. As Steve said, how did it work out for Cincinnati? They got Higgins. They're paying him a fortune. They got Burrow. And who's the second receiver on Seattle? I must have forgot. Well, Cooper Kupp. Who's the second receiver? Adams is old. Who's the second receiver for them? You don't need that second unbelievable wide receiver. Well, Adams is the second receiver, but he's old. Puka is a different story. You don't need that second great receiver. You don't need that second one. You can have a competent second receiver with the great first receiver, and remember, I don't want to hear from Dak. He's getting $60 million. You're one of the reasons why they're in their salary cap by making $60 million and maybe not being as good as you should be for that money. If they only give you the one receiver, work around it. Deal with it. I'm sorry.
Well, the other part. Well, listen, I get where you're coming from, Doggy. You're not off kilter. I get that part. You got to utilize the money effectively, particularly when you're the Dallas Cowboys and you're competing in the same division as Howie Roseman and the Philadelphia Eagles, considering how adroit he is as an executive in the National Football League. I got it. But the other thing that we have to point to, getting back to Jerry Jones, that quote on the lower third, it always works out. If he worked without an agent, he'd save a lot of money with me. Jerry Jones, do you realize how damning that quote is? Players have representation. When you're negotiating, the league is negotiating a deal with the Players Association, collective bargaining negotiations. There are negotiators and lawyers sitting across the table. Players have representation, not just for collective bargaining purposes, but for individual purposes. Jerry Jones is coming out essentially trying to discourage players from having representation when it comes to playing for the Dallas Cowboys. That requires a call from the league office. There's something wrong with that one. I'm sorry. I got to call Jerry Jones out on that too. You can't do that. You can't sit up there and act like a player is supposed to come up to you. And I said this to his face, Doggy and Shay. I'm not saying anything behind his back that I said to his face. I told you, I got a lot of love for this man. But I'm telling you right now, I said to him, you're 83 years old. What the hell do you think you're doing talking to a 25-year-old about a negotiation? You can't hold that against Micah Parsons at the time that he did last March. You were negotiating deals before he was born. What are you talking about? You can't do that. I'm talking about 40 years before he was born. You were negotiating deals. You're a veteran. You're experienced. And I'll never forget years ago, it's a quick little story that y'all need to know. I'm not going to say the player's name, but it was NBA collective bargaining negotiations. And somebody, a star player in the league, was so offended by the manner in which former Commissioner David Stern of the NBA, God rest his soul, was talking about him. He was shaking with anger, Doggy, shaking with anger because he was so furious, because he felt so disrespected by David Stern. And I looked at the player in the face and I said, if I challenged you on a basketball court, would you be insulted? He's like, what? I said, you heard me. He said, well, yeah. You know what I'm saying? You ain't on my level. I said, if somebody on the street challenged Michael Jordan, would you be offended? They're like, yeah. I said, that's David Stern at the negotiating table. You're a player. You walked into a negotiation acting like you know what he knows for a collective bargaining negotiation. It ain't the same level, bro. That's who David Stern was compared to a player. That's who Jerry Jones is compared to a player. That's why the player has representation. They're not lawyers. They're not agents. They don't represent themselves like that. They have somebody for that. And for Jerry Jones to be on a public platform encouraging players, look, you'd get a lot more, you save a lot of money with me if you didn't have an agent. That's not how this is supposed to go. Players, the NFL league office, the Players Association, I'd be very surprised if they didn't make a call to Jerry Jones. You can't be saying stuff like that. You can't do that. You just can't.
Honestly, the only player I could think of is Lamar Jackson that doesn't have an agent. And I'm sure there's more, but he's the only player we ever talk about that does not have representation.